All right, let's get started. We're going to call the meeting to order and go ahead with roll call.
Ms. Cooper Payton is excused. Ms. Harrell? Ms. Hetland?
Present.
Mr. Jacobson? Ms. Jones? Here. Ms. Orcherton is excused. Ms. Salmon?
Here.
Ms. Snyder?
Here.
Okay. Next, we need to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. I move that we approve them. Okay. All in favor of approval?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. I guess we're going to move right on to the presentations then. We're going to start with the staff report.
Oh, okay. Usually there's more than enough, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One day, go figure.
Right.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
It's been a busy day today. This is your August Public Arts Coordinator report. And I'll start by talking about Open Scene Open Mic, which has been the new initiative this summer. We've now got, I think, 4 of them under our belts, and it's been really wonderful so far. So this is grown out of our National Endowment of the Arts sponsored grant from a previous year, and what we've really wanted to do is kind of extend the mission of that program by inviting community-led open mics. We have a different host every time. We're in a different venue in a downtown business or organization each time. We started at Cunningham Township, which for anyone who came out was just a fantastic kickoff. It's been a hard one to live up to in some ways, so we're still building momentum since that time. That one drew about almost 200 people out to Cunningham Township, and we had people performing as young as like 7 and as old as in their 70s, and it was just really wonderful to see such a great representation of community. So we continue to grow that program. Our next one is August 22nd from 5:30 to 7:30, and that's at Common Ground. The host for that one is Abdullah Aziz, and that one's also going to feature Common Ground's some of their artists that have previously exhibited in their gallery doing some live painting, so we're really excited about that. Each business is working together with us to come up with something that's unique for them. So for instance, we had a lot of sort of family-friendly activities at 25 o'clock because while a brewery, they really want to continue to be sort of a family-friendly venue, and they've got the benefit of Boneyard Creek Crossing right there. So we were able to utilize that space. Obviously, Cunningham Township worked really hard. Their whole staff did a fantastic job to come up with things that would really bring out a lot of their participants. This was a great opportunity for collaboration between the Public Arts Program and Cunningham Township, because the township under Supervisor Danielle Chenoweth has really been working to establish this space as a space of community healing. So she's been wanting to bring more and more people out together to not see them simply as a, a sort of government arm, but to also look at, could it be a space for people to bring their children? They've built this community garden. They have free vegetables and things they give out, and they're trying to program that area and activate it more. So we're excited to sort of help out with that too. Our next one after this next week at Common Ground is going to be at Boneyard Creek Crossing on the other end, sort of closer to Station Theater, and that's going to feature storyteller Dawn Blackman. If you're not as familiar with Dawn, you can also catch her right now on Art Now. I'll speak more about that in a moment. But Dawn is going to do a story slam, and we're going to have some drummers and other people out for that one. And then followed by Urbana Dance Company, it's a new dance studio on Main Street. Kate Insolia, the director of Urbana Dance Company, is going to also be the host that evening, and she wants to do sort of a performance spin on Open Scene, so we'll have more sort of dance and performance. Urbana Dance Company is also home to the Performance Theater Project from Latrell Bright, so we're hoping that it'll bring out both people interested in creative movement and theater for sort of a performance showcase. Now I'll talk a little bit about Art Now. Again, this is our monthly mini documentary series collaboration with Urbana Public Television. July's edition features Dawn Blackman, excuse me, that should say August. August's edition of Art Now features Dawn Blackman. She's the steward at the Randolph Street Community Garden in Champaign. And one of the things she's also known for is being a fantastic storyteller. She's frequently featured at Read Across America and other events that are throughout the community, frequent storyteller at Spurlock Museum, et cetera. So we're excited to have her on, and she talks a lot about storytelling, but also one of her biggest inspirations, which is gardening and the garden, and the kind of programs that she has out there for people of all ages. So that's an episode that's now airing every Monday and reruns on Tuesdays, as well as our UPTV channel. Relatedly, we've been really working to get Art Now more visibility, more views, more presence. So as you know, our Art Now episodes already are featured on YouTube. But one of the things that we've been doing is collaborating now with Smile Politely to have a regular Art Now feature in Smile Politely in conjunction with the release of each episode. So the most recent one was about Jim O'Brien, and then the one about Dawn is scheduled to come out pretty soon.
Good.
So that has meant that we've collaborated with editors and writers from Smile Politely to come out. When I'm doing an interview now, we have a member of Smile Politely out with us at the interview, also kind of taking note, participating in the interview itself, and then we'll have this now in sort of an online print version of Art Now that complements the article, so or the episode. So you'll see, and actually you can look at this under blog was where the first one was located. It was just on Smile Politely's blog, but the future ones are actually all going to be as feature articles on Smile Politely. But if you look for this, you can also see that there's a kind of creative write-up that then leads into the episode. So it kind of piques your interest, and then there's some interviews there.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
I know you're really good about posting things on Facebook, too.
Yeah.
And when I've watched these on YouTube, I share them back again, besides sharing them on my own, but just posting them back to Facebook. If anybody's watching, you can,
Yeah.
click that link and get a little extra coverage that way, too.
Yeah, I really want to thank you. You're one of the people, I think, on our commission that reposts everything I post in a really fantastic way.
I signed up for the long
And
haul.
that is a really great way to support the program. Anything you can do to kind of continue to invite people
Yeah.
or let people know about things that are coming out. Other thing that we're doing related to this is trying to turn this into a podcast and or radio show. So it's currently being kind of proposed to both WEFT and WRFU, which is 104.5, that's out of the Independent Media Center, as a syndicated show. So I'll hopefully have an update next month to see what's possible there and sort of where things are at. But we've been turning them all into MP3s, which has been really exciting and pretty easy to do. Next, I'll just mention Artists of the Corridor. As you know, the exhibit on display is Scenes of Downtown by Christopher Evans. It's a collection of illustrated works exploring downtown Urbana and its people in a variety of settings, from cafes to public parks, venues to markets. One of the things that's exciting about this exhibit is that we've been continuing to grow the closing reception. So we had an opening reception on July 18th here at the City Building, but our closing receptions have now been organized by the staff in collaboration with myself at the Urbana Free Library, and they're intended to be sort of family-friendly, so we try to have some arts-related activity. So at that one, we're going to be having speed sketching led by the staff of the Urbana Free Library, and we're going to have some refreshments, and we're going to also have live music from Almost A. I think at that point it'll be Almost A Trio, because it's Dorothy Matriano and Armand. And so I'm really excited to have the two of them with us, too. I'll mention that Christopher Evans, as you may be familiar, also was a selected artist for Murals on Glass in 2013, so you can still see a portrait of Chip McNeil up on the parking garage. And Chris will be giving a Q&A at the closing reception. Also, Art at the Market recently featured Bone Jugs with veggie stamps by the Land Connection. It was exciting to have the Champaign Farmers Market, those responsible for the Champaign Farmers Market at the Urbana Market at the Square, because it was actually National Farmers Market Week that week, so it was really fun to have them with us. So that took place this past Saturday. And our next one will feature CU West African Drum and Dance and the Idea Store with a drum and dance performance and a recycled art workshop. I'll mention that Young Artist Studio also has an upcoming workshop. We continue these every third Sunday of the month at 3 p.m. This is our collaboration with the Urbana Free Library's Children's Department, and these are free arts classes led by local artists. So the next one is Sierra Murphy's Stained Glass Kites, and that's on August 19th, followed by September 30th, and that one is again a little bit later in the month, but that's the only kind of off week. It's actually to avoid our art expo. But that's a puppet making workshop with local artist Mark Enslin. The Urbana Public Arts Program selected 2 sculptures. I mentioned these last month, but just to refresh your memory, we'll have Races by Bobby Joe Scribner installed somewhere along the Illinois Marathon route. We're still determining a location. And we're going to have Ice Pops by Craig Gray and Boneyard Creek Crossing. Both of these and potentially some of the other wonderful sculptures that are being sponsored privately. We'll try to help, we'll feature them all in the sculpture guide in Urbana, and then also have some sculpture unveilings in conjunction with their installation. Hopefully ribbon cuttings and some fun around those. I've been in conversation with the Department of Dance at the University of Illinois of doing a kind of twist on a sculpture walk, of having interpretive dance performances where the classes at the U of I would be interpreting the sculpture, so those will hopefully take place in early fall. Our Art Expo is celebrating its 4th anniversary. It's going to take place on September technically the 15th through the 16th. 14th is an installation time. But the application recently closed. We received 29 applications. There originally, I think, mentioned 30, but one of the people who we gave an extension to, an internal extension, didn't end up applying. So still 29 is a huge number. We're going to have to narrow it to 17, so we've got a tough job. The jury's actually convening later this evening, and we hope to make an announcement next week about who's been selected to participate in this year's expo. If you are interested in volunteering to be part of the Art Expo, please get in touch with me and express interest, because we're looking for more people who want to help the day of and the installation on Friday. Last but not least, I'll just mention your social media marketing report. We've seen an increase in Facebook and Instagram. Twitter stays relatively the same, but both the increases were roughly 35-ish people, so it'd be interesting to see if it's the same people on both. One feature that Facebook has is to invite your friends on Facebook to like the public arts program through a button on our page. So if you are interested in also sharing the word about the Great Commission that you serve on and the arts program that you participate in through grants or other efforts, we encourage you to share that as much as possible. And that's the end.
Okay, very good. Okay, next we're going to have a grant presentation from Ellen Kirsnoff of the Urbana Park District.
And actually, Janet Sosby
Oh,
with the
okay.
Park District is going to join me. We're
Great.
going to do this together.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Got it loaded up. There we go.
Oh, wait, that's Rachel's.
Wrong one. There we go. Yeah, so we are both here. Janet and I are here to report on the Meadowbrook Barn Quilt, which we received a grant for. And the project funded, obviously, the barn quilt was the creation, installation, and display of the barn quilt on the north side of the Meadowbrook Interpretive Center, which is also called the barn out there. Grant funds made it possible for the Park District to commission the work. The artist is Travis Scheiss. The work was completed and the final installation done in time for the 2017 Meadowbrook Jazz Walk, which we really wanted it because that would be a perfect installation time for everyone to see it, which was September of 2017. Additionally, the event included pop-up children's art event that was themed for the barn quilt and provided children with a fun way to make their own quilt square to take home after enjoying the event with their families. The Park District the Urbana Parks Foundation also held a social event that was prior to the Jazz Walk, and that was done to include the official unveiling of the barn quilt that was installed on the side of the barn and served as an artist reception where Travis was able to meet the public and share his vision for the work. Attendance for Jazz Walk event that year was 3,000 plus. It was beautiful weather, we had a great day, and there were a lot of people there, which was wonderful. The Parks Foundation event was really well attended as well, with over 100 people there to meet Travis, to see the unveiling, and enjoy seeing that. This provided a lot of additional visibility for the artwork and the artist with an opportunity to showcase his talent. So we have received a lot of very positive feedback, both from those events, their Jazz Walk and the Foundation event, and continuing. People still will tell us that it's just a very nice addition to the barn. It really makes, to the Meadowbrook Interpretive Center, it really makes it a very nice, visible piece of artwork there at the park. And it's been good visibility, I think, for the Public Arts Grant that funded it. So, yeah, all set.
And I don't know, maybe I should have done this before, but these were part of the special event we had where we had the artist open house. So we had these up as long as some other artwork, but these are just two little panels that showed. This is the barn quilt that he did on his parents' barn. So that's a barn quilt that he had already done, and then he did this presentation where these are some of his previous barn quilt designs that he's done, and then that's the design itself that got selected for Meadowbrook. But I thought you guys might like to see that. It also has a short little bio on Travis himself there, but that was on display at the party at the barn. So this is the Meadowbrook Interpretive Center. I'll take you just really quickly through our process. So once we got the money, yay, the first thing we had, well, we've been wanting to do this like since Robin Hall was our executive director. He'd always wanted to do a barn quilt, so
Yeah.
exactly.
It's been on our wish list for a very long time.
So it was kind of long in the making, so it's very exciting for us. So the first thing we did was decide where on the barn would be best, and we did that with our planning and operations staff. So they did all the drawings and got that ready, and we all decided as a group. We have an arts and culture matrix team that makes up district staff and a park commissioner and then an UPDAC member that are on this commission. So we all worked together to talk about where we wanted to put it and the ideal location and size. And then we did the call to artists. So the call to artists went out on July 13th, and it was a real quick turnaround. The deadline was July 31st. So we posted it on our website, we posted it on our social media, and then we also put it on the call page for 40 North 88's website. So it was a real fast turnaround. We got a lot of people calling and asking for the documents, but in the end, we had 9 different artists submit 15 different images. They could submit up to 3 images each. And so once we sat together as a panel and chose Travis's piece as the one we wanted to put up on the barn, then we worked on putting the artist agreement together. So we did that, and that basically gave Travis a month to make the barn quilt, which I didn't realize how many different coats it takes when you do a barn quilt. So that was, part of the hardest part was how much time he had to do in between for all the layers to dry. So he had a month to do it, and then we installed it on September 6th. And up on the screen, we've got the little Instagram time lapse of the quilt going up. So this was September 6th.
How cooperative was Mother Nature with all those layers? Was it okay?
Yeah. I mean, he got it done he got it done quicker than a month, really. And then this was, renting the equipment and then renting a rain date for the equipment as well if the first install date didn't work out. So when we didn't need it, it was, you can see by the blue sky, it was a really nice day. So these are our park district staffers on the rented equipment installing the quilt, and I like how fast it makes it look like easy peasy. Well, you just put that thing right up there, no problems.
Yeah, I think Travis was a little nervous at first about the timing, but everything seemed to go well, so it
Great.
worked very well for him.
So, boo. All right, so this is called Prairie Sunwise. Prairie Sunrise, and it made its debut at Jazz Walk, which Ellen mentioned. The artist reception had 100 plus, and then Meadowbrook Jazz Walk, 3,000 in attendance. And then this was our kids' activity. Our graphic designer took Travis's design and kind of simplified it and made it into a coloring sheet for the kids, so the kids could do the coloring sheet at Jazz Walk. So we set up a special table for that. And then the kids liked it so much, and we liked it, we actually brought it back to the Phillips Center, and we put it in the lobby and put out colored pencils and markers. So we had that for a few weeks as well, and I saw quite a few kids do that coloring page there.
Sure.
And it was nice, too, to like let them know that, you know, if they hadn't been out to the park yet, then they could ask us, what's this about? And we could let them know about the barn quilt, and they should go visit. This is our project budget. If, Ellen, you want to talk about that?
Sure. Well, the grant we received was for $1,500. We tracked all of our expenses. We agreed for an artist stipend and then materials reimbursement for him, so we reimbursed him for the paint and supplies that he needed to actually create the barn quilt. The installation expenses there is really just the lift truck rental. We had to, as Janet said, we had to rent it, and then we had to rent a rain date. Have it in reserve. So if we couldn't do it the first time, we got a second shot at it. Miscellaneous costs were just a few things that we had charged to that budget line item for supplies for Keith and some of the guys to do. And then staffing costs really were pretty significant for this. There was a lot of work on their part to prep and have the panel ready, because the actual panel itself, we prepared for Travis, and then he used his paint, you know, he used the supplies for that, and that took quite a while. And then the installation, which you saw the you know, time-lapse video of that. And like Janet said, it makes it look like it just went up like that, but, you know, there was a little bit more involved with it than that. But and so overall, our total expenses, give or take, you know, those are pretty accurate, I think, was $2,443.29. So we can answer any questions you have. We love it. It's a great addition to the barn, or to the interpretive center out there and to the park. So
About how long do you think it'll be up?
Well, we thought we'd just kind of keep our guys will, they'll just kind of add it to their safety check, and they'll look at it to see how well it'll hold up. And so we didn't put a time limit on it, but we are thinking 3 years, and depending on how many coats he got on it, and he got quite a few, that he thought it could last anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
Great.
The fact that it's on that north side is a little
Right.
bit better, too, because it's not taking direct sun.
right, the north side should be better for it as far as any fading or anything. That should not be too much of an issue.
Okay, anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, thanks very much.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay. Okay, next we're going to move to a review of the Urbana Public Arts Ordinance.
Hello. So, included in everyone's packet was a copy of the 2008 ordinance that established the Public Arts Commission and the Public Arts Program. And so the reason we asked you to review it was because in preparation for the transition to an Arts and Culture Commission, this is actually the document that we will edit or amend to make those changes official. And actually, it'll be the City Council of Urbana that will be responsible for actually approving those changes. So we don't talk about the ordinance a lot, and so I think it's just helpful to review it and look at it and reflect on what's in there in the first place. And what I want to do is just step you through and give you an opportunity to think about, I guess, 6 things that we've identified internally that will probably need to be addressed, but we want to develop a recommendation collaboratively with the Commission. And you don't need to vote on anything today. That's not the intent. So we're going to skip over the recitals, the whereases, And we're going to skip right to the now therefore be it ordained part of the ordinance. So first of all, it's establishing the public arts program. So likely we would be changing to arts and culture program at that point, assuming that's the name we settle on. Next major change is we would need to add a definition for culture. We kind of talked about that in a little bit of the brainstorming we've done. We're going to kind of skip over that level of detail now, and Rachel's going to follow up and talk about a few of these things in more detail. Then on page 3, the commission name itself, we need to change that. Then the mission. And so that'll be the focus of most of our conversation, I think, this evening, is starting to talk about what that mission change should look like. If we were to all to come to consensus right away, you could vote on it tonight, but you're not required to. Then composition. So these are kind of longer, legally construed sentences in this portion, but what's important to note is that it says that the commission members shall consist of 9 members from constituencies representing various segments of the community which have experience in the areas of the arts. Okay? So it's very arts focused. And then later on, it does say members shall be chosen from a diverse range of backgrounds, occupations, and artistic venues. So that's probably still a good summarizing statement. However, it says with the intention of reflecting the full diversity of the Urbana arts community. And so again, we're probably going to be wanting to look to broaden that beyond just a reflection of arts, but also of cultural diversity in this community, and potentially also to just simply be broadly representative of the population itself. Thirdly, I'm going to skip ahead to page 4 under duties. If you haven't looked over these before, it's definitely worth perusing. But while the Public Arts Commission is a commission in name, in its duties and authorities, it is advisory. So you'll see the actionable words that describe the duties of the commission are terms like explore, recommend, propose, review, convene. The commission has little authority to formally adopt policy or approve expenses. And I just want you to be aware of that, and that's also something that could be considered for revision in the future iteration of this ordinance, especially as we look at more significant changes to the grants program. I think that where that might be interesting to discuss is if this, effectively what this ordinance is doing is the city council is giving authority to the commission in this document. And so if there's any authority that this commission would like to request as a part of this transition, this would more or less be the place where you would be requesting that in whatever's being forwarded to council. I'm going to skip then to page 5 to dedication. So this is something that is really one of the more powerful statements in this document, and we've called it 1% for the arts. When there is a municipal building with a construction cost of more than $750,000, 1% of that original budgeted amount will be appropriated to the Public Arts Fund and be used to incorporate public arts into the building or adjacent or proximate to. We haven't had a construction project of that scale that qualified in the city of Urbana, well, I think really since
the Boneyard.
The Boneyard Creek Crossing, yes. That was the one where that was utilized.
Right.
But we haven't since, and we haven't had it for a building per se.
Right.
But back in the definitions, it's a broader definition than just buildings. So that's something that's very important, and of course we'd want to continue that. But again, we might want to be specific about it doing more than public arts, right? Also culture as well, and depending on how we define that. And lastly, on the last page, there's mention of the Public Arts Fund, and it's referred to throughout this document. I've mentioned this before to the Commission, but with the transition that the city went through to the new financial system, the Public Arts Fund was eliminated. Now, I know that sounds a little harsh, but the reality is that the fund had no sustaining revenue source. And so what was eliminated was basically a financial model for keeping track of certain monies, okay? And so the fund was a necessity under the old financial system. It is not a necessity under the new financial system. The new financial system allows for more sophisticated methods of tracking dollars. So we will need to revisit this with the finance department prior to going back to this, but it's likely that it will make more sense financially under the new system to not reestablish the Public Arts Fund and remove it from the ordinance so that everything's sort of settled, because we would adjust the language. We would have the ability to take your 1% for the arts funds, and rather than deposit them in the Public Arts Fund, they would be requisitioned or a different financial tool to keep track of that money separately. But it doesn't necessarily require a separate fund anymore to accomplish that.
How would that affect any donations we get?
Currently, all donations we receive are routed through the, I'm forgetting the name, the Central Illinois Community Foundation. Am I getting the name correct? And
Okay.
so the funds remain there until we expend them for the stated purpose that they were donated for, and then
Okay.
we have to show receipts to the foundation to receive the monies, and at that
Right.
time the monies are transferred into the general fund. So the arts program is continues to be, prior to the elimination of the fund, it is and continues to be supported by the city's general fund. So nothing has changed in that regard, but it's something we're going to want to clarify in the future revision to the ordinance. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the ordinance as it stands, or if you want to talk about any of the sections. There's certainly a limit to my knowledge on this. I'm not an attorney, but a plain reading of it, I think I just went over 6 points with you that we're going to want to address.
Mhm.
And again, we want to really focus on the mission tonight and vision, and start talking about the grants program itself. And having those conversations hopefully will bring us back to kind of obvious ways to address the rewriting of the ordinance itself.
I guess, anybody have any questions or comments? Okay,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you. Okay, so Rachel, you're going to be talking now about the mission statement? Thank you.
Happy late birthday. Okay. All right. I don't actually have anything to pull up for this part, so I just minimized things to get them out of the way. So right now, last meeting, we spent some time talking through the process of mission statement creation, vision of what an arts and culture program, in the perspectives of our public arts commissioners, ought to look like and maybe achieve at its most successful. And one of the things that we sort of talked about doing at this meeting was putting something in a visual Wordle for you, which I did. This is all of the words that were written down on your pages, and probably if any aren't here, they were only appeared once or something like that. So the ones that appeared the most also are represented the largest. So you'll see that some of the words that repeated a lot were community, diversity, arts, obviously culture, artistic, identity, artists, developing, celebrating, spaces, life. So you can see these kinds of words that really repeated. I also wrote down your mission statement brainstorms. Now, if you weren't at our last commission meeting and want to in any way give feedback, this is another opportunity for us to do that. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we did last meeting, your mission statements, what kind of came about from all of those, and then what a draft statement could look like. Again, you don't have to necessarily vote to adopt anything tonight. These are parts of sort of ongoing visioning, I think, with all of us together. So the mission statements that you came up with were to reflect, foster, and celebrate the cultural and artistic diversity of the city of Urbana, to make Urbana an arts-rich and culturally inclusive place to live, work, and visit by providing resources and programs for artists and community members, to guide Urbana on all facets of art and cultural awareness available for community enrichment, to provide meaningful programming opportunities to activate and integrate the cultural assets, artistic vision, and identity in everyday Urbana life, to celebrate artistic and cultural expression in Urbana, and to provide opportunity for arts and culture to thrive in Urbana. I also want to just go over briefly some of the things that, that the commission identified as examples of a successful arts and vision for a sort of a vision for a successful arts and culture program. So at its most successful, an arts and culture program would appreciate cultural and artistic diversity. It would foster a high level of artistic activity, nurture artists, add art to functional spaces, enrich the lives of community members, make public spaces works of art, support individual and community expression, celebrate cultural diversity, develop individual artists, increase community access to the arts, develop a community identity through the arts, showcase the city of Urbana as an arts destination, broaden minds and engage communities through the arts, and support the arts as an integral part of education. So these were some of the things that you identified. So thinking about mission statements as truly at their best when they are like 7 words or less, and trying to condense all of this down, and thinking of utilizing vision statements as places for more depth often of what where we want to be and what we see as our most successful. We came up with celebrating and nurturing Urbana's cultural and artistic diversity. And the lengthier version being the Arts and Culture Commission celebrates and nurtures the city of Urbana's cultural and artistic diversity. So this is a very, very simplified, short and to the point. And then kind of as an example of what a vision statement could look like to complement a mission statement. And mission statements, you know, thinking about them as things that people should be able to like recall and remember really easily. I can tell you from our current, and maybe this is a good practice, like of our current mission, do you know it? Have you memorized it? Is it something that you could recite right now? Of the long mission statement that we have, I think the thing that I remember the most is where artists and non-artists can engage in the arts and artists thrive and are valued, which on a lot of things online I've condensed to like where art thrives, sort of like what we've kind of come up with. So to be thinking too about like what are the kind of statements and things that are easily consumable and easy to kind of have other people take on and remember. So a draft vision statement, though, to complement that could incorporate, for instance, a lot of the things that you identified as a commission as examples of a successful arts and culture program. So as an example, I just drafted something like this. So the city of Urbana is a place where arts and culture thrive. Here, all residents and visitors can engage in and experience arts and culture through programs, events, and initiatives that invite creative expression, celebrate diversity, enrich learning, and build creative public spaces, and showcase the city of Urbana as a thriving destination for cultural diversity in the arts. The Commission nurtures a community identity through the arts that embraces, celebrates, and unites all of our diverse histories, beliefs, cultures, and aspirations. So just as an example, you might have something like that more so incorporates into a vision statement the detailed things that would identify where we are when we are our most successful. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. This is sort of a follow-up on last month's meeting activity. But I would love to hear your feedback, your ideas, what you're drawn to, what you're not so drawn to, about what's here in front of you. Mm-hmm.
I just have a question. When it comes to putting together like a mission statement, how important is it, or what consideration is given to like what the marketing then will be for the program and in crafting that?
That's a good question. Are you thinking of like marketing, like the print marketing, or things that we typically, how we talk about the program?
Just how you talk about the program, because to me it seems like where arts and culture thrive, that's something I would remember.
Yeah.
And that might be, you know, there can be distinctions between like what is a mission statement, what is a vision statement,
Right.
and then what is sort of a easy tagline that gets put on marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to answer your question, I thought of that question as well, and even wondered if like the word thriving should like be somewhere in, if something like that would become a short version of that. But I think they could also be a little bit different riffs on the same idea.
Go ahead.
I just want to respond to that because I kept thinking about like NPR radio ads when we were looking over these, because I kept thinking like, this programming brought to you by the Urbana Public Arts Commission, celebrating and nurturing Urbana's cultural and artistic diversity. If it didn't
In
fit,
that NPR voice.
yeah, if I couldn't, that was my best NPR voice. But I couldn't, if I couldn't kind of imagine it in that context, then I was trying to figure out, well, how can we express a similar sentiment with fewer words?
Right.
So I was thinking about that a little bit, but I think it's a good point. How do we draw the line between mission, tagline, et cetera?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm choking a little bit on the word unites in the last sentence of the vision statement. How do you unite diverse beliefs? How do you unite diverse histories? I think that unite, my editing would be to eliminate unites, because it becomes, well,
Yeah,
it
I see
just
what you're
becomes
saying.
internally inconsistent.
So something like that embraces and celebrates our
Yeah.
diverse histories, beliefs, cultures, et cetera.
Right.
And the same
Embr-
thought, yeah.
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 I agree.
my phone, I hadn't turned my phone off.
Any other comments?
I had a thought, and it's just, I'm not being dogmatic about it, but I was looking at where you say programs, events, and initiatives that invite, and I got to start thinking, instead of saying that invite, something like inviting, encouraging, or supporting, just maybe different words, rather than two words, some encompassing word, like, it's the second sentence, it's the second line, where it says, and initiatives that invite creative expression. That invite could simply be just inviting, but then do you want the word encouraging or supporting? There could be a couple of different versions of that word, but it's not de rigueur.
Yeah.
I just have one other comment, and I'm sure this was it sounds like a collaborative effort you guys were working on, and I just want to acknowledge how difficult it is to distill this down like this. And I think what you've come up with is really a nice representation, and I like celebrating and nurturing as far as those pieces, because that is what we're trying to do to help it grow, but then also to recognize and acknowledge what's here, so.
Yeah, and we thought too about like, there's probably moments in programmatic moments where we're doing more of that celebratory work, and that could be, a public event that creates a space or an opportunity for people to witness culture, the arts, et cetera. Could be more of that, celebratory versus nurturing, could be offering resources or, sustaining programs or
Yeah.
propping up what's already here that's doing really well. Maybe just like gut reactions.
I thought it was really great. I second everything that Katie said too, that it must have been really hard. What was your process like to like condense everything down?
I'm really wordy, and Brandon's a great editor. So one of the it's like editing down and making things simplified. So I tend to like write things out. But one of the things I did is I had a few different versions of this mission statement, and I was going to give them all to you, but it probably just would have been more information than you really needed. That kind of walked through, well, this is, maybe the wordiest version. Here's something that might condense, because we don't actually need to say all of that in the mission statement, for instance. And this is what happens when we go back to those key elements of a successful mission statement, thing that we brought up last week, and kind of revised it based on that. And then it eventually got pared down so much that it's pretty short.
Thanks.
I had one other comment. When you were walking through the bullet points at the top, it seemed like we were hearing a lot about art and artists, and so that initially was a concern, but then when you get down to your vision statement, the way you kind of lead with the arts and culture and then underscore kind of the actions that you do to celebrate and nurture those things, I think worked well to kind of give equal footing to both of the pieces, whereas from the bullet point standpoint, I was like, oh my goodness, it's a lot of art, and that's good, but what about the culture thing? So
Yeah, and if you recall, when we took a look at other Arts and Culture Commission mission statements, it seemed like the trend is that a lot of them had been public arts programs that had sort of transformed into incorporating culture more intentionally, and it was sort of revealed in that way too, whereas maybe the language was still very much embedded in arts alone. And I think that is a challenge because, of course, we don't want the arts to at all get lost. Like, the arts are the vehicle by which culture is often shared. So how do we keep the arts very centered and present while also making sure that culture is centered and present in a new way? Yeah, I think that's really important. And that, too, would come out, I think, in the revision of the ordinance and how we talk about the program, as well as what kinds of resources do we offer, for instance. Yeah, and how we would draw that out, and that might lead to the grants conversation too, but.
one last question about that. On the last sentence here, I just noticed, like, I guess, are you using the words community identity to be almost synonymous with culture then in that sentence? Because we're sort of celebrating culture. I liked how you said you utilize the arts as the vehicle to celebrate culture. So is that kind of what this is talking about at the end?
Well, I think that this is going to be really fleshed out when we define what culture means. And that actually is written into the ordinance. We define our terms. But one of the distinctions could be thinking about what does our, and it is sort of a cultural question, but is there like an identity of the city of Urbana? And it's seen for laying sort of a groundwork for cultural things to happen, but also artistic things to happen, creative spaces. And it might circle right back to your question of like, well, how synonymous is that truly? But it also might be an opportunity to explain what culture is in a different way.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Just a quick note on that. I think another way of thinking of that is also does anyone from a specific background, can they see their identity as being a part of our community and part of our arts scene, or the same with artists too. My form of expression, can I see myself as being a part of that identity? Is it an inclusive identity? I did want to just mention, I forgot what I was going to say. I guess it wasn't that
Well, you
important.
raise an interesting kind of thing for us to think about when we think about definitions, right? It's like, is there, we're going to be talking about distinct cultural identity groups that live and work and visit this area, and how our programs and our resources meet their unique and distinct needs. But then at the same time, there's, of course, a goal of making sure that the sort of generalized things that we offer also reflect the diversity of those needs, and might to be a similar pathway to sort of, I used to always talk about with my students, like a house is like the location, but maybe I'm going through the front door, you're coming through the back door, someone else is going through the window, like we're all getting to the same place. So how do we make pathways for people who have different needs to get to a shared identity or a shared space or shared set of resources, by making it possible for them and based on their needs, which could be very different.
And possibly staying open to new ideas as well.
Yeah, and I think that is part of it. When you do cultural work of any kind, there's a constant reassessment of like how are the needs shifting and changing, and how are we meeting them or failing to meet them, and then like what steps do we need to take? It really is a question that never gets answered completely. It's really an ongoing part of the work, which I think is sort of an exciting challenge.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Brandon.
So I wanted to encourage the commission to think of the mission statement in a different sense. I mean, we think of mission statement often as the thing that we're going towards, right? Or it defines our way of getting to a goal. But sometimes it's easier if you flip it around and use it as a limitation. So if something doesn't meet these criteria that are written into the mission statement. If something the commission's thinking about doing doesn't celebrate Urbana's culture or artistic diversity, and it doesn't nurture Urbana's culture and artistic ability, should we be doing it? And I think that's a decent sign of a functional mission statement, because we should be able to use it at times to reflect, do our programs meet our end goals? And we kind of ran through briefly just the programs, the main things we do, and they all really did seem to match up squarely. But I wanted to kind of encourage you to think of it that way too. And ideally, it's something that the commission can use to keep itself in check in the future. If you say, well, you know, does this advance our mission? And I would hope right now it might be a little challenging because we don't have a paragraph to pick apart. This approach might make it a simpler test and allow us to keep on track.
Okay. It makes you wonder how big you want to be and how expansive your programs are, and you don't know for sure. I mean, I think of what's happened in the last 10 years, and it certainly has expanded greatly. And is there a point where there's no end, where we keep doing that, or we might find a limitation along the way? I don't know. I don't know how you would figure all that out. No way. Until you're in the midst of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can
I don't either.
in advance.
Yeah.
Well, and, you know, I think this is especially true of cultural work, but it's true of arts work as well, is that because they're often also synonymous, let's talk about it that way, but it's, you know, what we do is responsive to what is coming up in the community, in the world. What are some of, like, the questions, the current, you know, issues on people's minds? What are the current needs of the community? And those things are constantly changing. So, you know, even our mission and how we get to it is going to be a movable target. You know, it's something that we'll have to keep talking about all the time, and probably is true for every program.
Right.
Sort of to that end, at first when I was reading this and seeing the word diversity, I mean, obviously we want to celebrate diversity, but the reaction that I had, just sort of internal reaction, was, wow, that's kind of limiting, because, which is kind of counterintuitive, but in a sense, like, once you've established these programs and they're going, and then things change, it's really taking on, like, another challenge to say, we're going to be committed to continue to make space for whatever these changes are. So at first it felt like, well, is that too limiting? But then after thinking about it a little bit more and hearing you talk a little bit more, I interpret it more as we're committing to make space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important. And, you know, in my experience, and I spent the last 8 years working in cultural centers, and is that no one program is going to meet everybody's needs. So it doesn't always mean that a program has to have that aspiration of meeting and involving and being desirable for everyone, because it's just unlikely. We can always strive towards that, but the other thing is making sure that as a program writ large, so like as a arts and culture program or public arts program, that we have things that meet diverse needs, even if, you know, it requires to have a couple of different kinds of programs or a couple of different kinds of things, that in and of itself is a type of diversity, versus saying, like, well, this one event needs to meet the needs of the whole community. You know, it will require that there's actually an assessment of the kinds of needs, and then maybe distinct kinds of programming or initiatives that would meet those needs.
And an openness kind of to change. I mean, once those programs are going, like, they're established and they're meeting certain community needs. And so
Right.
having that openness to say, yeah, we don't expect this one program to meet everything, but continuing to assess and say, okay, the landscape has changed. We have to be willing and flexible to change our longstanding programs to address that, I guess is what I was kind of getting at.
Yeah, that's right.
Eric, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what you said. This hadn't really been on my mind in this context before, but culture evolves. Cultures evolve. And that of Urbana, you know, does as well. And, you know, in the few decades that I've lived here, this community has certainly evolved a lot. So I wonder if it's worth trying to put that concept, which would imply that programs wouldn't last forever in their current form, but they too would evolve or adapt. And so I'm wondering about maybe the last sentence in the vision statement, where we now say that we embrace and celebrate all of our diverse histories, beliefs, and cultures. If we embrace and celebrate, maybe just add a phrase, as they evolve.
Yeah, and I think of the word responsive programming, so like the idea that we're responding to that shift and that constant changing.
I had occasion today on the telephone, in a telephone survey, to be asked my gender. And I was very proud of myself at my age to be so with it that I said cis male.
Yeah.
And I said, I bet hardly anybody my age would think to say that.
And it's true, like these are things to think about how we incorporate that into the work that we do. And one thing that I would encourage you all to do as we continue to think through and vision a program like this is to look at other arts and culture programs. We looked at their mission statements, but to actually kind of do some searching and look around at the kinds of programming that they do. So I noted, for instance, when I was looking at other programs that have grant programs, and I expect that we'll talk more about this even next month, because I can bring some of this up as well, that there were grant programs that had grants specifically for cultural work, or that had maybe like, cultural ambassador programs or different sorts of things. So it can obviously look a number of ways, and then we're up against a lot of things. For instance, there's art forms that often are kind of recognized as cultural work and not recognized as like fine art. Or and so we've got these kinds of dimensions that are interesting too. And I think that we get to push back on those and really think through them as a commission. Should we talk about the grant program?
Yeah, I think it's time to move to that.
Okay. So I'm going to keep this relatively brief. I just wanted to kind of get us thinking too about the an eventual revision of the grant program to a degree. And this comes, of course, on the curtails of the Public Arts Commission now being responsible for what was formerly special event funding. So you sort of have an increase of roughly $50,000 that can be incorporated into a revised grant program, and we can determine what the needs are and how to respond to them. And in that spirit, I wanted to share with you a little bit about, for anyone who just needs a refresher, about the current grant program as it is, and then some of the kind of common questions, concerns, feedback, praise, gripes that we sometimes hear about the grant program, all of the above, that could maybe help inform any revisions that we do. So first I want to say just a quick overview of our grant program. We have technically two grant programs. We have the Urbana Arts Grants and Arts in the Schools. Worth noting because it may make sense to, for convenience sake, put them together in one grant program and make categories that meet the different needs. So right now, I'll just speak to our Urbana Arts Grant Program. This has 4 categories: individual, group, nonprofit, and festivals. I don't go into detail here, but some of them require matching funds. Individual grants, for instance, do not. So individual grants are really designed to support solo artists, whereas groups and nonprofits often have slightly bigger initiatives, and then Urbana festivals often are the sort of larger events. But that said, we don't currently have a lot of delineation. And that's one of the questions I get a lot is like, well, what makes a festival a festival? What makes a group a group? Is it just that we don't have 501c3 status? Or is it that we're more than one artist working together, et cetera? So one of the things that it would be, I think, prudent to do would be to also go through and think about making this very clear in policy around the grant program so people understand, well, this is how I qualify for this category of grant versus that. And that's, of course, assuming the categories don't change at all.
I would just mention that festivals probably are something that happens on a recurring basis versus the one-off projects that are the other things.
That could be that
Yeah.
could be a constraint.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it means for somebody who wants to throw like a one big time music festival, but they're not planning to do it next year. So these are like, I mean, but these
I
are
can't
great
see anybody
questions.
doing that, honestly. But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's plenty of opportunity for thinking this through. You'll notice that the categories are slightly different. So in terms of the amounts available. So for instance, individuals kind of cap at $2,500 versus group and nonprofits at $5,000 and festivals at $10,000. In practice, I have not seen big grant amounts. And of course, I have not been here very long, but even in looking at some of the previous grant cycles, our average grant is $1,900. And that was, of course, based on some numbers that I think Morgan or Pauline pulled together that were incorporated into a grant presentation that I edited. But I saw that there was a $1,900 average. So we also know that our grant program, our grants tend to be small. And that ought to make a difference in how we revise the program too. So we can talk about what minimum amounts should look like, for instance, and what, yeah. So all of these things I think need to get sorted because we have things like, well, you can get up to $10,000, and I'm not certain. I don't know if a group has gotten $10,000 or when that last happened. For
I think the
instance.
festivals, are you sure?
Maybe
The
maybe one of
festivals?
the festivals.
Yeah, not in the
probably in the
past couple of
spreadsheet.
cycles.
Okay.
Any
So
QuickBooks or
we
something,
can
whatever
talk
you
more
use.
about that, but
Yeah.
those are some, potential questions.
Just to add to what you said, Rachel, I've sat on several of these grant panels, and it's not that people aren't applying for that much, it's just the resources are so limited and there's so
Right.
many applications that
Right.
the panels tend to not want to give to one to exclude 10 other people from having a shot at it, so.
So I'll just go over the program real briefly, and then I'll get into some of these questions that keep coming up. So currently we have a deadline of usually like late January, early February. Contracts tend to be signed in March. I don't know why this is so light. I apologize if it's difficult for you to read. And then our cycle runs April 1st to April 1st of the following year. And then we typically include things like a grant release celebration, and it should be noted that 3 of our grant categories, individual, group, and nonprofit, get half of the funding up front and half after the completion of a final report and presentation. And then the festival grants are all up front. Arts in the Schools is currently a separate complete grant program, and it has a slightly modified process. It is relatively similar, but it is a 2-step application process currently where people apply and then they reach out to a school and a school submits a letter of support. In my experience, I don't know why that has to be 2 steps and why those things couldn't, for instance, come all at once. But these are just questions that we can kind of work through. Right now, the jury process is 2 jury panels for the arts grant program. We take into consideration educational and professional qualifications, diversity, familiarity with the local art scene, and those who have conflict of interest are recused, or recuse themselves usually. And then we evaluate based on artistic quality, community integration, and project feasibility. So you can see that already our arts grant program incorporates an attention to diversity and kind of cultural representation, and then commitment to reaching out to diverse groups in the area and integrating the community, but that could probably be drawn out a little bit more. I think this is all I've put on this, but I just wanted to share with you a little bit about the grant program as it stands. Now, some of the feedback we typically get, especially the more positive feedback, is that it supports such a diversity of projects. Our arts grant program really, like, there is no, one of the questions I always get is like, what kinds of projects get funded? And the answer is like, every kind of project gets funded, which is really, reassuring for lots of artists and groups. And I think it really shows a major strength of our program. Of course, a lot of people just celebrate the fact that a city has a public arts program and that it directly supports financially artists. And our grant categories do invite both organizations and the young up-and-comer artists to apply. for anything from a very small project to a very large project. And I think we have some safeholds for those two things not being in direct conflict with each other or competing for funds too. And we might want to figure out ways to keep that. The things that make our program really strong should remain, right? But some of the questions that we get a lot are, sort of differing opinions on when is the best time for a deadline for the arts grant program.
Oh, we have
I mean,
changed it so
and
many
we've changed it a
times.
billion times, exactly. So that comes up all the time. I especially hear this from people who are organizing large-scale events. So we hear this from folks who say, I can't know in March that I'm getting funding for something that's occurring in the fall, because even though that sounds like a long ways away, it doesn't give me enough time to plan or book people or that sort of thing. And so another question that's come up before is, could we have funding for a period of like 2 years, or for people to know like a year in advance or more that they're guaranteed funding? And this may or may not be possible, but these are questions that we get. Is there potential for larger grant amounts? That, of course, comes up all the time, but especially for people doing larger scale things, in which the Urbana Arts Grant usually represents a very small portion of an overall budget. Can categories be clarified? For instance, what makes a festival? I always get this around the arts grant application time, and I noticed that previous public arts coordinators got this question a lot because there were notes on it. But like, what makes a group a group? And I had people asking, if me and my friend are writing this together, are we two individual artists, or are we now a group? And how does a group become officially a group? We get questions about whether the jury could perhaps have more direction in the jury meeting. So those of you who've served on juries, this may have come up before. So for instance, is there a policy for repeat applicants? Or what is the minimum grant amount that we can fund? Or for instance, if there's a grant application, are we guaranteeing that all applications would be funded no less than 60% of their asking budget? Or these sorts of questions like that has come up before. And when we have a group that received funding but only a small portion of funding, we currently do the work of trying to summarize the jury's reasoning and then making a recommendation of what they want the funding to go towards, for instance. So like in an example, if somebody's budget included like the purchase of a lot of water bottles, and we thought, well, this is an arts grant program, so we actually don't want to fully fund that project, but we're going to ask that the arts piece that was asked for in the amount of $500 be funded, that might be a question. So these are the jury deciding these kinds of questions in conversation with each other, and more policy and guidance might help a jury make those decisions.
Go ahead.
Question. And when you're looking back now, what does the data show as far as like the return on the investment? How many, which grants are drawing the most people, or the events are drawing the most people, and you're getting the investment per person, for example?
Yeah, so currently...
Have you looked at any of those statistics?
Right. Well, currently what we ask for is a final report, right? And we rely on that self-reporting. And the final report asks for budgetary information. It asks generally for a write-up on outcomes, but this could be another place for revision. Are we asking... what kind of evaluation are we asking them to do at an event? And if, for instance, we're asking that we meet or that it perhaps does outreach to a wide sector of the diversity of our community, are we tracking that information? I know that in my previous life of doing programming in my last position, it was always actually a lot of bemoaning to think that counting heads alone was the idea of a successful program. So I think that it needs to come with still that narrative and talking about, because even if something reaches 2 people, but those 2 people are rarely reached by any other project or program in the community, and 2 is an exaggeration, but it's like, does it lack value? And I think those are questions for us to kind of come together and ask. But I do think that evaluation criteria could be added to the program. And these are things that just would maybe make clearer the kinds of information that we give the jury, give the applicants, and give the grantees when the time comes for them to do final reports, or even when they're doing their project. Yeah.
Something that I wanted to add was just that depending on how important, the program decides that matching funds really are to granting, I think that could be space for more attention given to where those are coming from. Because I think right now there's like a box where you can say $500, but like, we don't ever know, like, where does this come from? Like, is this real? Is this something you're hoping to get or you've already secured? Like, I think there's some space there.
I noticed that in the budget sheet as well, where the notes appear to almost feel optional to people, so people don't write out, what is this truly for? Like, I even want to know what supplies are supplies to you, and whose artistic fees are being paid, or even like what's the rate that they're being paid, so that we can kind of understand, is this paying 4 people or 1 person? These are really good questions that could use some clarification. And I think it could just be very simply revising that grant budget sheet to make it very certain that it's a required answer. And if we did something like an online grant application form, those could truly be required answers, and they couldn't submit without writing something there,
Well,
right?
It would do the work for you.
Yeah,
Compiling
exactly.
all of that.
Right.
So these are all options too. Other questions that we sometimes get are, is the goal of this program to seed new projects or to sort of sustain well-established projects, or both? And that is just an ongoing question, and I think it's been both. So we might keep it both or return to that question, or that those might be different grant categories potentially too.
And remember, we have about $51,000 coming into the program this year that has been traditionally allocated directly by the City Council to ongoing special events by and large. So that's going to be an even more pronounced issue, and we're not really focusing on that today. We're really trying to focus on what we've been doing, but kind of having our existing program be broadened to include this other source of funding, it's going to be very important, and that's a crucial question of ongoing funding versus encouraging new starts.
When does that funding become ours? Because didn't you say a few meetings ago that it's already been earmarked for events this year or next year?
Yes, you're right. So the amounts that will be paid in the current fiscal year, so the upcoming Folk and Roots Festival and Pygmalion Festival, those funds were already committed by the City Council actually last fiscal year. So we then, in the coming grant cycle, will be dedicating funds for the next fiscal year. And I should point out that those major event organizers, particularly those buying talent, Folk and Roots and Sweet Corn, are a couple of the ones that were most interested in making sure that their award is well in advance so that they can plan farther out. And I think that generally applies to the larger festivals.
Pygmalion and stuff.
Yeah. I don't want to, I could go into more detail on this, but I just wanted to make sure we're including that in the conversation.
So to summarize, some of the possible directions are clarifying whether there are seed versus sustaining grants or both, whether and how we're offering larger sums of money, policy revisions that will guide and further clarify applications and jury decision-making and constraints of jury decision-making, because it is a burden on jurors, too. If you've served on a jury, it's an emotional burden to try to meet all these different needs at once. And so maybe creating some more constraints will help that decision as well. And revisions of grant categories, and I would like to recommend the combining of Urbana Arts grants and the Arts in the Schools program, and simply just making a different category, and if it requires letters of support from the school, that's just a requirement if you're applying to that grant.
Sure.
So I wanted to just briefly ask you, and I know I don't want to keep you too long talking about this, but I do want to ask you if you've heard other feedback that's not on here, or if there's other kinds of things that tend to come up for you when you're thinking about the grant program or hearing other grantee presentations, that sort of thing, because I want to note them. And then I think the idea is that hopefully I can bring some ideas to the next meeting for us to digest together of possible directions that we can go in with the grant program.
So, okay. A long time ago, I was the public arts intern, and one of the duties I had was trying to find an online grant application platform to use. So, like, I think it might have been implemented, but then maybe, and clearly it's not being used now. So, like, it sounds like you really want to have that happen. So, like, is that something that would be explored further too?
It could help. I have companies calling me all the time to like walk me through tutorials, and I did one the other day on another online program, and some are free and some charge a lot of money to have. But I think that having those kinds of tools that also make it easier for the user might be good. One of the things that happens around deadline time, even most recently with our art expo, is people having challenges with opening a PDF or having last-minute problems. And one thing I learned in a position like this is I'm not the only procrastinator in the world. So all these questions come at like 11:30 at night when it's due at 11:59. And I think having a user-friendly way to submit might help. Like I didn't have half as many questions with even Murals on Glass, and we just used a very simple, free online way to submit.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also from like the grant panelist point of view, if a software like that would make that side of the house a little bit more pleasant to
That's
review
true too.
everything.
It can even be done online. So, I mean, I love bringing the jurors together, and I think there's something important about them being face-to-face. But I served on the Arts in the Schools jury previous to joining the staff, and I remember that we did an evaluation prior to coming together, and so that could also be done online. And you could, depending on certain kinds of software, you can make certain things available for a juror to see, including like if it's a blind jury, you can make just their work samples available, and they can evaluate right on there, and then we could come together and talk about it.
Yeah, and I'm even just thinking of like the way you consume the files themselves. There's
Yep.
probably some more elegant, solution that costs lots of money to do. One thing that popped into my mind was like from a program outcome standpoint, I think there's like 5 or 6 objectives that you're supposed to kind of fold into your application. I can't
Right.
quite remember what they are, but it might be worth sort of revisiting that and saying
I almost
more
included
about,
them, and sorry I didn't.
No,
I
no,
have
that's
them
fine.
on this presentation normally.
and to say more about like what does it really mean to meet that?
Yes.
And that kind of gets to the point you made about like counting heads versus other sorts of ways of meeting that.
I'll bring those to the next meeting, and we can take a look at them together. And if I'm bringing anything else in terms of ideas, I could also try to incorporate some suggestions of how those things could amend, and we could talk about them together. But yeah, there is program goals of the Urbana Arts Grant
Right.
Program, and I know there's a specific, I would argue, kind of a specific community cultural element to them a little bit, but it definitely could be drawn out a lot more.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
building on that a little, one idea that's come out before, although I don't know how practical it is, but is the idea of sort of having a theme or, changing that emphasis across cycles. Like foundations often do that. They'll reassess after a few years and say, okay, we're really going to focus on, these kinds of programmatic outcomes. I feel like that's a more sophisticated thing that we wouldn't be able to do in the near term, but an idea. The other is a criticism I've heard sometimes is that it's hard to see the collective impact of what our program does. And there's kind of 2 ways you might come at that. One would be putting some more criteria into the grant. I mean, we've been doing more with the, I feel like the grant award celebration has been getting bigger and more visible. So, to the extent that we are sort of obligating our grantees to do things together, the other on the back end is, in terms of the reporting again, we've also talked at times about actually expending program dollars to effectively hire a filmmaker or, a photographer to actually, give them the list of all the events and have them go out and do some professional videography or filmmaking, or photos even, so that we can aggregate that back up and have some really nice assets. As you've seen, there's great diversity in how documentation occurs and maybe how polished that is or how consumable that is for a general audience after the fact. Just a couple thoughts.
How much of the requirement stipulates providing like photos or video?
It's not like required, but it's certainly asked for in your final report, and I think almost everybody does provide photos and video. One constraint I think we should think about, and I don't know, I mean, we could probably have a debate about it, but I do see a digital divide as still existing, very much so in our world, and my only concern about even like an online platform or submission is that it requires some know-how about using the things. And so I wonder if there's possibility for us still making space for people who, number one, maybe don't have a computer and find it really difficult to get to one, to still turn in like paper. I mean, I get paper copies of everything that we ask for, and I get like on not a floppy disk, but like on a CD, everybody's stuff, or maybe even somebody giving me a small flash drive with their work samples. So it's not uncommon that I have people telling me that they don't have access to the internet at their house, or they don't have a way of emailing. I've worked with people who don't have an email. So I think that, making that a requirement will make it difficult for some working class people or people who don't have access to those things to feel that this is a program for them. And since we're really wanting to make this a moment for thinking through inclusion and diversity, it might just be something for us to keep pressing upon. Like, well, what can we do? Whether we incorporate new tools, are we still leaving a door open for people to submit a different way if they must? Another thing I think of is when we're thinking about culture is language barrier. So thinking through how to make our program accessible by putting things in multiple languages or doing specific outreach could mean that more people who make art but don't do it in or maybe don't have it in a language that is easy to write up in a grant application could still find it possible to get funding to make their painting and have their exhibit or do their performance piece, because art is also that common language that transcends lots of cultural difference. So we want to make art continue to be that sort of vehicle that brings us all together, even if we don't speak the same tongue. And so I think that's another thing for us to think about as a group when we're visioning.
Okay.
One last thing that I think you and I maybe talked about after the last grant panel is that it seems like there's some applications that are really strong on their marketing plan, and then there are others that aren't, and those that aren't tend to get a little dinged, I think, because we're worried that the program's not going to reach anybody.
Yeah.
And so if there's some way to add an educational component, whether that's pointing them to a resource that exists already on YouTube or online or something, or whether that's offering something, that could be a benefit.
Yeah, I talked a bit about that, and nobody here would know that, but I talked a bit about that in grant workshops that we gave. Right. Well, I did an orientation, and that was sort of new. I don't think that an orientation had happened previously. So I did an orientation, and not everybody took advantage of it. I offered, I think, 2 or 3 of them. But we assessed certain things that people would love to have, and that came up. There's artists who have no graphic design skills, have no idea of how to go about that, and are really doing their very best when they come up with something very simple. And one thing that we could do, for instance, is even having templates of flyers that they could just put their information in, and it generates a flyer and it has our logo, not stretched or looking wild, but like exactly as it needs to look, and that sort of thing. We could really help make it easy on them. But my constraint with all of those big ideas, and we came up with a big list of them in our orientation, is that is my time, and just
Yeah, I was gonna
figuring
say
out
that.
ways
Yeah.
to make it happen. So, I tried to resist making a lot of promises in those orientations. I mainly tried to take down what people wanted, with the idea that I'll try, and then we'll keep record of what the wants are, so that as we continue to grow, we know where we want to grow, based on the grantees' feedback. But that came up a lot, and then things like checklists for how to put off a successful event or program. Like, lots of things came out of those meetings. Ongoing series, and there's an arts group in town that's keeps coming back to this conversation about educational seminars for artists in general. And I and Kelly from 40 North have been talking a lot about how to support those efforts and continue to grow people's knowledge around things like copyright or taxes or how to market or how to approach a gallery, like all these kinds of questions. So I could see a lot of grant topics fitting in there too.
And just to add to that, in the same vein with reporting, the marketing aspect, there are things we could require potentially, such as submitting dates of events so that we could at least try to have a rolling list of a public arts calendar on our website.
I've been trying to get that for years.
Well, and I don't mean in a broad sense. I mean literally just these are our grant recipients, and here's some upcoming things, because we've had a lot of conversations about arts calendars in this community, and there's no obvious solution right now in sight. And it still would be a lot of work even to just try to corral those folks. The other angle would be, and Rachel was already kind of implying this with templates, but we could even go a step further and literally pay for marketing services that are available to our grant recipients, so that they're being uniformly presented with some of our marketing assets on a real consistent basis. I think there's ways we could restructure.
Yep, I was gonna- Go ahead. No.
You can do it for free on Google. I maintain one for all the regional orchestras within 100 miles, because they all depend on the same musicians, and they're all booking the same weekends, and they go, I need musicians. Well, they're over here. You can't have them, but you want them over here. So
Yeah.
I keep one for all the major orchestras in the region.
And
It's
we
free.
talked
I mean,
about
it's my
that
time,
too, like
but-
putting things in a cloud so people have a lot of resources that are there.
Yeah.
And they could just find like lists and things like that. And, it becomes then just another thing to maintain. So
Yeah.
it's really
Right.
just thinking about a plan for that before
And
we
that-
make
Well,
that's
if
the
they want
cost,
up here, they want that free publicity, they're going to
Yeah.
submit their material.
Yeah.
Like I grab a lot of stuff from the Cranach calendar, for example, because they've already compiled it, and then you just
Right.
share it.
Well, and 40 North has a wonderful artist
Exactly.
directory.
Same-
Right.
Same idea.
Yeah.
And Mr. Google and I are frequently not friends, but there is an enormous suite of tools in there, and
Yeah.
you could make your grant application in a Google form and then have it printed out, and it will print out as a Google Doc, or it'll print out as a spreadsheet, or and then that makes it accessible in many different ways on many different platforms. And like I said, Mr. Google and I are frequently not friends, but you could find somebody who's good friends with Mr. Google. And
Well, and some of it's just exposure to it, because I never used to be able to do it. Now I use it all the time, and our staff is using it, and it's making it's so accessible for the staff. They just look. They don't have to wait for you to answer. They want to know what the statistics are. They just boot up and look.
Yeah.
And so, I've found it incredibly efficient and helpful for people.
And it's a thing that you can make them open but locked, so that anybody can look at them, but only one person can
Right.
change them.
Right,
So
right.
then you can put them on Facebook, and you can put them, you can put the link anywhere you want to put it, and anybody can look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to be really important to think about what possible tools that we could incorporate to make everything a bit easier.
Right.
And then, as part of that conversation, to think about potential barriers. There are people who, for instance, feel really insecure using Google, like for security issues on the internet. And it's like, how do we make sure that they have an avenue for submitting that makes them comfortable? Similarly, like with the, I don't have a computer, I don't have internet, or these kinds of things. I want to make sure that people can still submit and know how to fill things out. So I've offered grant workshops, and I think those should continue. And as we continue with this conversation, it might be a good idea for me to present the whole grant workshop to you at some point once we've made the revision, and see what kind of questions could we dream up might still remain, and how could that workshop get even better. And I've gotten really great feedback. That's not my workshop. That was put together by a previous public arts coordinator. I just keep adding to it. And I think that it's been really helpful for grantees. And I've been trying to be deliberate about offering the workshop in different areas of the community. And I really want to work on offering it in areas that are underserved by the arts, and making sure I offer a workshop and go to communities, not ask them to come to me.
Go ahead, Barb. Could it be recorded and made available online through
Yes.
UPTV?
Yeah, that was a question that came up too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you can reach a lot of people, even if they can't come to the seminar.
Yeah, Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I heard staff saying was, could we have something like a contract with an individual who is really knowledgeable about outreach techniques, and to perhaps work with our awardees on maybe an hourly basis or something like that. Would that model be the kind of thing that you were addressing?
I don't know.
I mean, yeah, that'd be one way to approach it. I mean, the general idea just is, you know, for those examples I was giving, there's sort of like a regulatory approach. You're putting some requirement in the grants that they're signing off, but then staff is sort of in the process of sort of prodding and educating, trying to get folks to do something.
Well, and for some people that will make sense, but for other folks, I mean, think about really well-established festivals who have a whole plan of marketing that they
Right.
do, who would not want to be told, you have to use this design or this, we need things in this way. So it really would be like, are we offering a resource for the folks who need it and who opt in?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Some folks won't need it, some folks will need it, but for the folks who need it, it benefits us because it increases the visibility of the program,
Yes.
increases the impact of
Sure.
the program.
Well, and ideally that, especially if it's in a collaborative process, that they're effectively learning something in the process. I mean,
Right.
there's sort of a whole other conversation we've had at times about how can we do more deliberate things to help artists develop financially and as businesses, so that they're getting economic outcomes for themselves. And but one thing at a time, I guess.
So I suppose the other question on that is, well, I guess specific models can be discussed. I could imagine that there's somebody on staff in the city who would have those skills, and maybe some of that time could be bought off by, public arts program, as Public Arts and Culture Commission as part of as part of our budget, or maybe it could be a freelance person, but I mean, I guess I think that although what you do on a volunteer basis for the orchestras is great.
Oh, I get paid. But
Oh.
some of it, the calendar is volunteer, but
Yeah.
it helps me with my job that I do get paid for.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably we probably need to pay somebody for this function.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it
So
depends.
we'll-
There won't be a one-size-fits-all approach, as Rachel was implying, and maybe it's a specific category, it's a specific thing that people say they're interested in on their application, because in that sense, it's kind of a service of the program.
So I presented a bunch of feedback. This was not done through a survey. This is just what we write down as feedback year after year and what I've heard this past year. And that's why I asked for other things that you've heard as well. And at this moment in time, I plan to kind of take any additional feedback that we hear, and of course, if you want to share anything outside this meeting or email me, feel free. But I want to take a look at some of the things that kind of reoccur and come up with some possible directions, and I'll bring that to next month's meeting as well.
Okay, go ahead, Eric.
So one thing that I have not heard is that we have supported any body or any project that is even slightly controversial. So we seem to be, whether by design or just temperament or whatever, we seem to be being quite safe. And whether that's good or bad, I guess, I don't know, but that does seem to be my impression.
The Fringe Festival.
One day a Fringe festival. I will speak it to the ether and hope
There you go.
at Urbana, the Fringe Festival will exist.
I guess you need, what do you mean by being safe? Because I can remember in the very early years, there was one that was rather controversial, and people said, why are you paying for that?
Well, that was before my time. What really prompted me to be thinking along these lines is what happened to Nina Paley at Arcadia. And I realized nothing like that has happened to us, at least since I've been involved with this.
Yeah.
And I had a very heated discussion. I was in a group of people that had a very heated discussion about this last night. And it was exciting. Made me think.
Right. Right. Highly contested moments are ones that really make us think, too. Well, does this seem like a good enough plan, Tim, for me to come back next month? I'll come with some possible
I think so.
directions and synthesize any other information that you've given me in the meantime.
Okay, well, thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have any announcements they want to make before we adjourn? Okay. I move that we adjourn. Can I have a second? All right, we're done. Thanks very much, everybody.